Well, ladies and gentlemen, as promised, I have a fantastic guest. I've been really excited to share this gentleman's story with you, and you're going to hear it yourself in just a moment. I have with us retired from the Coast Guard, retired Master Chief Petty Officer Dr. Vincent Patton. Served more than 3 decades for our nation and continues to serve. Currently, he is sitting as chairman of the board of trustees for the Northeast Maritime Institute, and he's also the president of the Northeast Maritime Institute's foundation. Dr. Patton, first of all, great last name as an Army fellow. But Dr. Patton, I want to thank you so much for joining us. And just for fun, we'll do a radio check. How do you read me over?
Lima Charlie, Lima
Lima
Charlie,
Charlie, I love it. Ah,
Lima Charlie.
I miss those days. Sir, thank you so much. I first learned about you through the Institute, actually. They had a social media page and I read about that, and you had shared some really interesting articles. So I want to get into your profession, of course, now, and we can talk about that. But before, let's time travel a bit. I mean, 3 decades in the Coast Guard. That's fantastic. Walk our listeners through why? I mean, what led you to choose the branch, the particular skill sets you learned? How did all those decisions come about?
Well, Rob, first question is, how long is this show? Because
It's 3 decades, 3 months, and 7 days.
because I'm gonna try to shorten it because it's it's a somewhat unbelievable story in terms of the first part of your question. Why the Coast Guard? How did it happen? Well, okay, to make a long story short, I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, and uh, my oldest brother, who happens to be 8 years older than I am, when he joined the Navy, I was 10 years old at the time when he joined the Navy. After coming out of high school, he's sending me home all of these pictures of the Navy, and I just fell in love with the Navy. And it was all about the Navy. I had just about everything you can think of that had anything to do with the Navy. My brother gave me one of his sailor hats. I wore it all the time. So anyway, everybody in my family, everybody in my neighborhood, all said, and I all knew that I was going to join the Navy. So fast forward, age 17. In fact, on my 17th birthday, I'm a senior in high school. And because that's all I talked about was joining the Navy, my birthday present from my parents was they were going to sign for me to go into the Navy's delayed enlistment program, which
Sure,
is
sure.
you're a senior in high school, you can enlist now, and then after you graduate, off you go. So my birthday fell on a Sunday, so that next day on Monday, right after school, I headed down to the Navy recruiting office in downtown Detroit, Michigan. 231 West Lafayette Street, to be exact. And I walked into the federal building there in this long, narrow hallway where all the recruiters were. And I head for it. And at the end of the hallway, I see this guy sitting at his desk in a Navy uniform, the blue Navy uniform. And I said, Navy recruiter. So I made a beeline for the office. And as soon as I walked into the office and he's on the phone, he says, have a seat. I'll be right with you. I get ready to sit down. And all of a sudden I look at the pictures on the wall. Navy ships are gray. All the ships I saw were white or black, and it said Coast Guard. I walked into the wrong recruiting office. I didn't even look at the sign on the door that said Coast Guard recruiting. So I'm too embarrassed to turn around and walk out. And I said, well, I'm going to act like I really did come in for a reason and I'll go find the Navy recruiter.
Sure.
Well, so while he's on the phone talking, I'm studying the pictures and I find them pretty cool and interesting. And I mean, I knew a little bit about the Coast Guard. There's a Coast Guard station in Detroit, which at Belle Isle Park, you always go by it, you see it. But that's about all I kind of had any interest of knowing about the Coast Guard. So I stop and I read one of these things hanging on the wall. It was a unit citation, and it was of a 1952 rescue, which even today, myself and many folks in the Coast Guard has said that that was the greatest rescue of all time that happened off the coast of Cape Cod
Huh.
in February of 1952. In fact, years later, Disney made a movie about it called The Finest Hours.
No
So
kidding.
so
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
I
I'm
uh,
familiar. Yeah.
I read this thing, and I said, "Wow." And the recruiter stopped his phone call, looked at me, and said, "I guarantee you can do something like that in your first 4 years in the Coast Guard." That's how I joined the Coast Guard.
That's awesome.
I,
But but I have to ask how your parents reacted because if that was your birthday gift to go to the Navy and you exchange it for the Coast Guard, how do they respond to that?
well, they were concerned because how could I make such a snap decision after 7 years, and this is all I want to do, and so forth. And I thought about it because I went home and I'm going through all the brochures and everything, and I've been following my brother's footsteps for a long time, and who, by the way, he remained in the Navy and made a career, retired as a captain '06, so he had a
Oh,
very
good for it. That's
successful Navy
fantastic.
career,
Yeah.
and then I thought I was letting him down, and but then after talking to him, and he said two things to me. He says one was, you know. It was a few years after I got into the Navy that I found out about the Coast Guard, and it's not a bad service. And then secondly, my mother said to me, "You have followed in your brother's footsteps long enough. It's time for you to do your own thing." And so that's kind of how it ended.
That's incredible. Yeah, you certainly have a strong family that encouraged you to do your own path, and whatever that was, they were supportive. That's fantastic. Yeah, that's wonderful. So just for our listeners' sake, you're actually only the oh boy, after all these years, I think I've only had two other fellow folks from that branch from the Coast Guard. Walk our listeners through what your initial training was like. Where did you travel? How did those first few months or years go for you?
Well, so we moved forward several months later after that walk into the wrong recruiting office and graduate from high school in June of 1972, and off I go to the Coast Guard Recruit Training Center, Cape May, New Jersey, which is at the very southern tip of New Jersey. And back then, boot camp was 10 weeks. And interestingly, when people think of the Coast Guard, they think of it kind of a little fluffy organization. And I'll tell you, I thought that too. When the bus pulls into the training center, and we new recruits that are getting ready to get off the bus, we're greeted by a Marine Corps drill instructor. Now, we were all confused because we're going to the Coast Guard, and this guy, the typical Marine drill instructor, Smokey the Bear hat, yelling at you and so forth. And, so we're just confused as all outdoors. Now, back then, this was 1972. So what was happening was the Vietnam War was kind of winding down. And the Marines had all of these drill instructors. They didn't know what to do with them. So they farmed them out to the Navy and to the Coast Guard.
Just to scare the
So
heck out of everybody. Yeah.
exactly. So the good news is we only had this crazy man for 2 weeks of our 10 weeks because he's like the forming week guy and so forth. And so he kind of set the tone that this is not going to be a picnic. And I'm grateful for that because, I think myself and the other folks on the bus, we all thought about, the Coast Guard, being probably the easiest branch to get into, only to find that, well, that's not true at all. And for a lot of reasons why it's not true, because of the responsibilities that are placed upon you, particularly with saving of life and property at sea, law enforcement, all these different kinds of things that you actually do that, yeah, it's not a cakewalk. So boot camp was tough, very, very, very tough. In fact, um, even to this day, it is still tough. Although no Marine drill instructors, however, the drill instructors for the Coast Guard today, many of them go through a similar uh, Marine Corps type training for drill instructors. So it's tough, and they all wear Smokey the Bear hats too as well. But it's not as easy as people think it is. And again, I'm grateful for that because of the responsibilities of what the service does.
Yeah, that's interesting. I truly didn't think about it from that angle because I live in upstate New York. We're right near an international border with Canada. So Coast Guard does a lot. They're in the news all the time. They're
Yes.
busy. And a good friend of mine, and in fact, he's been on the show, Scott Pugh, Coast Guard veteran,
I
local.
know him very well.
Oh, you do? That's
I sure
fantastic.
do. I
Oh,
sure
that's
do.
fantastic. Yeah,
We
yeah.
and we keep in touch with each other. And of course, he teaches the JROTC program over at the
Yeah,
Maritime High
Western New
School.
York Maritime Charter School. He's over there.
Yes,
One of
yes,
the nuclear engineer instructors. That's fantastic. I didn't know you two knew each other.
yes, yes.
That's mind blowing. That's great. We could talk about that later too. But 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 my point is, I grew up here, and I remember we have actually every branch sort of represented. We even have a Marine Reserve base on the water there. I was Army National Guard. There's Air Force Base and what have you. And I think the Coast Guard's so active here, especially with the law enforcement piece. And I spent some time in the Guard on active duty on the border here, and I really learned how hard I mean, rescue missions. We have the falls, we have the river, we have all sorts of things that happen there, and so they're active. So in my mind, I guess because I was around it growing up, and then when I went off to the service and really started to understand what I'm watching on the news from those missions, I can't even imagine the training required to be able to go and do some of the things that you read the Coast Guard is doing every day.
Right.
So it's interesting that you are from an area where there was kind of a like they talked it down a little bit, whereas not the case over here. If
Well,
anything, my friends in the Air Force, if anything, they get picked on a little bit because of how automated and tech driven. There's a lot of desk
oh yes.
jobs at the base. So if anything, the Air Force gets picked on from time to time, which I don't think is fair either. But
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
as you mentioned about being from the Buffalo area, and me being from Detroit, it's similar in the fact that, we a lot of Coast Guard activity up and around the Detroit River and into Lake St. Clair
sure.
to the north and to the western part of Lake Erie to the south and so forth. So, and I happened to be stationed at home over the course of my career at one time to find out just how large and roles and responsibility that the Coast Guard has. At one time, when I was stationed in Detroit in the late '70s, at one time, the Coast Guard station there at Belle Isle, uh, which is in the middle of the Detroit River. If you've ever been to Detroit, you know where it is. At one time, it did more search and rescue cases than Miami.
Whoa, wow.
And boating season is way less than down in Miami and so
Yeah.
forth. But at one time, we did an awful lot of search and rescue cases then.
Yeah, I would never guess it. That's incredible. Huh. Wow. Oh, you have had quite the story, and that was just the beginning part. So, over the 3+ decades, I mean, what were some of the highlights or travels and missions perhaps that you want to share with the listening audience that might not realize, some of what was involved for your career path there?
Well, I started out my career after boot camp. I went off to radioman school, communications, and in my quest for trying to find out if my recruiter was correct that in my first 4 years I would have an exciting adventure like I read, and the truth is I did. And I don't think it was as fascinating as that. Particular story that ended up into a movie, but certainly I found myself in positions and so forth that I would say, wow. I mean, there were times that I was scared as all daylights, and then in the end said, wow, I can't believe I did this. So after radioman school, which was located out in Northern California, north of San Francisco, I went back east, went to a ship out of New York, Governor's Island, New York, which is a little island off the southern tip of Manhattan. And I was stationed on Coast Guard Cutter Dallas, which is about the size of a destroyer, um, to try to give it a size of what it looked like.
Hmm.
And our role at that time was particularly doing fisheries enforcement up in the North Atlantic. And the U.S. had just signed a law called the Magnuson Act, which was the enforcement of fisheries treaties off the 12-mile coast of the United States and so forth. So one of the Coast Guard's role and responsibility is really is the insurance of of enforcement of fisheries treaties laws, like how much you can catch over a certain period of time, endangered species, to keep watch over and so forth. It's a pretty heavy responsibility. The bad news of that responsibility in the North Atlantic is it's cold, it's wet. I don't care what kind of time of the year it is. Storms, all these things happen, and I found myself, in some pretty serious bad weather situations that we were doing. And my job being as a radio operator, was sending messages back on weather as well as keeping track of the vessels and so forth. And we had several um, rescue cases that occurred, particularly with fishing vessels, but also with freighters and so forth. And those are some pretty harrowing experiences that I would say that happened. And I always found myself, particularly after coming back from a patrol, that it doesn't hit you until maybe a few days later that wow, I was part of saving somebody's life. I took an SOS call and did the right kinds of things to make sure that we got the right
Mhm.
rescue assets out to be able to do the jobs of what we did and so forth. So it was kind of a humbling experience, but again, it doesn't hit you until after you get back and
Yeah,
you talk about it a little bit and you start building a little bit more of these sea stories that sort of happened to you and so forth. And then, as I mentioned to him, when I went to Detroit, right after that, I was assigned to the command center there, which was kind of like a 9/11 operation, and we took in all kinds of cases, from people overboard, vessels on fire, missing people, and even we had drug interdiction situations. We're talking about this into the mid to late 70s that we were having those particular problems. They've been going on for a long time. It's just that it didn't come really, I think, into play until maybe 15, 20 years later that people began to realize, drug interdiction from the sea, from the water,
sure.
including within the Great Lakes and so forth, was a big problem and so forth. So I got to do a lot of that, and then fast forward even thereafter, my next type of operational assignment, when I went to the West Coast, I went to a ship as I moved up in rank, and I moved to Seattle, and I was on a ship similar to the Dallas, which was called the Boutwell, and it was based out of Seattle, but we did Alaska fisheries patrol. Now here I am again, up there in the cold climate,
Just
and
can't get to that warm
yeah,
sunshine. Yeah.
but it was different in some ways because the fishing up in the Gulf of Alaska, the Bering Sea, it's different because um, well, you got fish processing ships in addition to the fishing vessels that you're dealing with. I mean, if you've seen the television show The Deadliest Catch, that sort of gives you sort of an impression, at least a visual thought about how the seas look and so forth. And just before I got off that ship, we had a big drug bust, and it was actually off the coast of Oregon because we were heading back from our uh, Alaska patrol, only to get a call from uh, the Drug Enforcement Agency that there were some targets of interest that were somewhere off the coast of Oregon, and so we had to divert going home. It cost us about 18 days from getting home, but in there we found at that time, the year was 1988. At that time, it turned out to be the biggest drug bust on the West Coast
Wow.
at that time. I mean, it's been far exceeded after that.
Yeah,
But it but
sadly.
it
Yeah.
but I think what it did was sort of open the eyes of the federal government, as well as the Coast Guard and so forth. That look, we got these motherships that are in very strategic parts of the oceans, and they were motherships because I mean, they're the official drugstores, and so the small vessels go in and get what they want and so forth. And we happened to get a mothership that was the Motor Vessel Encounter Bay. You can have your listeners Google that and read up on that. But at that particular time, I can't remember the dollar value uh, of that vessel. But Mr. Google should be able to tell you the answer to that.
Yeah, well, on top of that, sir, I
So,
mean, think about your reference what it's like to be part of a rescue mission where you know you're saving someone's life. Law enforcement and drug busts like that, you are saving lives.
absolutely.
When you look at the horrible numbers of overdoses in this country for all the right, all the various reasons of people get, this isn't a political show and none of that matters really. Addiction's a problem in this country. We all know that. So when you're stopping as you said, the drugstore from making delivery, that's saving lives.
Yeah,
Well, that's got to give you an incredible, I mean, you'll never know how many,
that's
but
right.
no matter what the dollars are, that's just the data that they track, but it's the lives saved from not having that on the streets. So that's incredible. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But those are the things that I think back to walking in the wrong recruiting office. It was the right choice, and the recruiter.
Absolutely.
The
And then they
recruiter.
have the Marine at the bus. Did you think you got on the wrong bus at that point?
We all thought that. In fact, some of us started crying. I kid you not. We said, "What the hell did we get into?"
Oh, see, those are the fun stories that I think all of us that served. It's kind of it's an acquired taste sometimes our humor, but those are fun stories.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I had learned sometime in my I don't recall when my teenage years, a friend of a friend, family friend who was a drill sergeant told me that the base I was going to, they said, well, there's these code words that drill sergeants use. They have these code words because it was coming off of I joined in I'll use air quotes, peacetime. It was in the 90s. And they were coming out of, like you said, the Vietnam era training that was very aggressive, very quick. Well, you had some of these drill sergeants that had been around a while back in the days where you could actually, physically touch your recruits and such. So I had a family friend that was a drill instructor say, there's some code words, and one of the things you want to listen to is sometimes they'll say a drill sergeant will say to another drill sergeant, "You have a phone call." And that was like their little inside way of telling them that they were going too far and they had to walk away. And the other drill
Yeah.
sergeant so fast track to my boot camp, I can remember just getting absolutely diamond push-ups smoked and I'm sweating.
Oh yeah.
South Carolina heat just and this guy is right here in my ear just
Yep.
da 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 da. And I wasn't, it was actually my battle buddy who had made a mistake, but I was getting yelled at for letting him make the mistake. And I hear another drill sergeant. I promise I had another drill sergeant say to this one, "Drill sergeant, you have a phone call." And he stopped and he looked up at the other drill sergeant and he says, I can't say the full sentence with the word on the radio, but he said, "Take a message." And he continued to just drill. So yeah, but see, those are fun stories for us now. At the time
Yes.
when you're 17, 18, 19, it's overwhelming
Ex-
in the
that's
brain.
right. That's right. That's
But
right.
to look back and go, wow, that actually gave me a skill. That gave
Hmm.
all of us, you know,
Absolutely.
as silly as that sounds to some listeners that maybe aren't familiar with the training of the military, that was actually something that helped us all kind of form some resilience and to deal with, some mental pressures, we'll say. Yeah. So you did a lot of travel and you did a lot of different types of missions. That's really something. Um, and then somewhere in your career, of course, I mean, 30 years is a long time, right? Most folks do 20 or so.
Right.
I have to ask this because I have not had too many friends go to the 30 mark. When did you know you were like, what was the decision either you or your family made that said, you know what, 20 is not enough. I'm gonna go farther.
Believe it or not, 2 weeks in the boot camp. That's
Wow.
the honest to God truth. So the
Oh,
the short story, it's a long story, but the short story is 2 weeks in the boot camp. As you're running around getting yelled at, and so forth. I consistently would run, walk uh, past this very large portrait that sat on we call it the quarterdeck, the hallway of the barracks. and it was a very large portrait of a man in a full dress uniform, and his rank looked a little different than what our books showed us. Because in the book, it shows that a Master Chief, like your friend Scott Pugh, Master Chief, their rank has 2 stars over the Eagle. Well, this guy had 3 stars over the Eagle. And I was confused because, knowing all of the Navy ranks, which were pretty similar with the Coast Guard, uh, I I saw this guy and I was confused about it. So I asked my drill instructor, which we call company commanders, and out of curiosity, who is he? Now, first of all, here you are 2 weeks in the boot camp. You don't be asking those kinds of questions. So, needless to say, that my drill instructor, who by the way was the Coast Guard guy by this time, I was done with the crazy Marine guy. Uh, who is he? Because the book, or the Coast Guard's manual, did not show this rank of a Master Chief with 3 stars or whatever he was. So he gets into my face, as the drill instructors do, and says, "That's the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard." And as I'm standing at attention with that yell into my ear, you think that Seaman Recruit Patton figures that that's enough. Now go about your business. I had to ask him another question.
Follow-up question.
Yeah, sir, what does he do? And he's irritated now because, first off, I mean, I shouldn't be asking him these questions. And so he decides he's going to give me the one question that don't ask me another question. He says, he tells the Commandant what to do. Well, I didn't have another question after that. What I thought at that point is, oh, I want that job. That's what I want to be. And that was my goal. That was my desired goal of what I wanted to do in the Coast Guard. And people laughed at me because, the only way to get to that position is Master Chief of the Coast Guard, just like with the other services, like the Sergeant Major of the Army, the Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps, and so forth. The only one person holds that rank. And that's what I wanted. And that was my desired goal. And so I was going to stand as long as it takes to get there. And by year 26, I became the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard. And
It's incredible.
rest is history, as they say.
Absolutely incredible. I love that you had that at such an early part of your training. And just, oh, absolutely incredible. I love that story, sir. Absolutely. Wow. Oh, so 30 plus years of service. And then eventually, you did decide it was time. So how did that go? And I know it hasn't been too terribly long of a period for you, but how did that come about? What was the initial phase for you? And then how did you decide to pursue what you're doing now? I'm really curious about those decisions.
Well, first of all, when you become, the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard, or the senior ranking of that person, your next step is out anyway. So at the time you get that rank pinned on you, you've got, or at least in the Coast Guard, you've got 4 years and you're out the door. So
Sure.
it planned for me, and but I think for me, in terms of my preparation for after the Coast Guard, was part of what I was doing in the Coast Guard for my goal, education. I knew that I had to be as much as a cut above of anybody, excuse me, anybody else that were, whether they were going to pursue that position or whatever the case may be. So do good, do the right kinds of things, and then start looking for what you're going to do when you get out. And I was very much interested in wanting to get into education, wanting to teach. So it was a natural fit, and my non-operational assignments that I had in the Coast Guard was all involved with working into the training atmosphere. So it just worked out for me, and so when my time came to retire, uh, I was already looking at the next step, and I was looking at higher education. So primarily after I retired, my first job was teaching at University of California, Berkeley, and then that kind of rolled into working into the corporate world, but in the training aspect of the corporate world, then going back into higher education, which where I am today.
No, that's fantastic, sir. Congratulations on that. Do you want to expand a little bit on the institute itself and for listeners not familiar with it? And
Sure. And the Northeast Maritime Institute, it's actually the title's even longer, is Northeast Maritime Institute College of Maritime Science. Okay. And we're just going to keep that long title. And that's primarily the school is a combination of both an academic, it's a 2-year college program. Graduates come out with an associate's degree in nautical science. But on top of that, they also get credentialed as a mariner up to 200 ton, and they'll go and work out into the maritime industry either as uh, uh, able-bodied seamen, third mates. Some can qualify as in the second mates, depending on the other types of things that they have done in preparing for going into that. And the other part of the school is also a vocational school too, because for mariners that are out there getting their master's license or getting upgrades and so forth. So it does both to get an academic educational degree as well as those that are working into the field already and they want to get their upgrade on their tonnage and so forth to get more money and work on like on freighters and things along those lines. So how I got into it was I happened to be on a board at American University, which is where I got my doctorate degree from, with the guy who was the president of Northeast Maritime Institute, and we were on a board together that was on involved with leadership development, and he told me a lot about the program that Northeast Maritime has, and the school is located in Fairhaven, Massachusetts, which is just across the river from New Bedford, Massachusetts. Where, most
okay.
people know where New Bedford is, but
Yeah.
Fairhaven's right across the river. And I went up there and for a visit and fell in love with just completely fell in love with it. It's a very unique campus in that we've got kind of 5 settings of our campus. We have a marina where our boats are tied up. We've got several academic buildings and so forth, simulators. We've got all kinds of cool stuff that are around that particular school. But the thing that I fell in love with the most was one of the concerns, particularly in this country, that I think your listeners, everybody should be well aware of, as we may not understand that 70% of our goods transit across waters, particularly the oceans and so forth. The maritime industry right now is hurting. And it's hurting because of age. The average age in the maritime industry is over 60 years old. Last number I heard it was like 61 or 62 years old is the
Whoa.
average age.
Yeah.
Okay, so people retiring out and so forth. And it's a case of people not coming into the program because the very few people know about it. It's not one of those things that young people sitting in high school today, when they start looking at what they want to do and they're focused towards that has it ever occurred to you that maybe you might want to work on a tugboat, you might want to work on a freighter, you might want to, whatever the case may be, unless you live close by in an environment that you see those, and maybe even then it may not get your interest. So Northeast Maritime has been very aggressive, both in pursuit of getting good students to come in, but also to raise the visibility within the maritime industry, which is part of the uh, uh, Northeast Maritime Foundation. That's one of our big focuses, is raising the visibility of interest into the maritime industry, as well as funding for our scholarships, because many of our students that come into the program, require some level of funding. In fact,
Sure.
for you Buffalo listeners out there, we've got a wonderful student. Thanks in part to my good friend Scott Pugh, who was one of his students that we've gotten into the program through one of those particular scholarships. So we're expanding. Even though the schools in Massachusetts, I mean, we're looking all around the country. We've got a student from Montana that's in our program as well. But
Well, yeah,
the
the
whole point
demand's at
here is,
high. I had no idea that the average age was over 60 now.
yeah,
That's
it is. So we're doing as much as we can to shorten that gap, and with that is excite young people, just as you excite young people about going into the military and so forth, is that in this particular vocation is very, very important.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. I'll make sure we have some links to the Institute and everything below. So, folks, if you're watching this now on YouTube later or the replay on our podcast audios, just please go to the page and underneath this gentleman's bio, you'll see all the links of what he's referencing to. And I would encourage you to share it with people. There's a lot of folks, not even necessarily younger folks. There might be people that left the military and they're in their mid 20s looking for a new challenge. There might be all sorts of scenarios out there where like Dr. Patton just said, 70% of everything you buy, everything you see at Walmart is going to be on a ship before you
That's right.
saw it. So you there's a big demand for that. I had no idea the age was over 60 though for average. So there
Yeah.
that's almost like a crisis point. It reminds me of the engineer shortage that we had in the early 2000s where
Hmm.
we have folks around here, companies that have changed names over the years, but what used to be called Praxair, I have a friend there that was with Human Resources. He had to travel the world to find recruits for engineers because all the factories were all gray-haired individuals, you know. So what you're describing to me is very reminiscent of that crisis, which was a crisis.
Yes, it was. Exactly.
So that definitely needs, we got to get the
Yeah.
word out on this. So
Yeah, and particularly like in your general listening area and so forth. I mean, that's a maritime community. I don't think a lot of people realize that or not, but particularly all of the large cities along the Great Lakes are defined as maritime communities, and that industry is hurting as far as getting good qualified people into it.
well, hopefully we can get the word out and get some folks interested because and it's travel. I mean there's all sorts of adventures there, so
Absolutely,
it's
that's
really
right.
fun. I do want to ask, you mentioned quite a bit today, and of course you are a leader and you have been a leader for pretty much pretty much your entire career. You've been leading others. You shared with me some of your family members that taught you some very important lessons. I'm wondering if there's one particular lesson or leader, fellow leader, I guess I could say to you, from your time in the Coast Guard that is still very much in the mind today because it's just that important. And maybe something that you only could have picked up from the service, perhaps. Is there any leader or lesson there that kind of comes to mind?
I have a broad spectrum of those super, super leaders. And what I mean by that, from a low rank individual to a high rank individual. And I'll take the high rank individual first, and that being uh, the admiral that I worked for when I became Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard, Admiral Jim Lloyd. Uh, I think anybody that's even heard that name, he's an accomplished author, wrote the book Character in Action, along with Don Phillips, who's the guy that's generally known for writing books like Lessons of Leadership, stories and so forth. But Admiral Lloyd, uh, when I first met him, and at the first time I met him, he was a lieutenant commander back then, and I was told when I met him that they said this guy is going to become commandant someday, and I just from knowing this guy, it was about insightful viewpoints, about vision, and about focusing toward vision and always looking ahead. And he fueled me with my goal. It was no longer a dream. It was a goal about wanting to become Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard. And he inspired me by just that whole vision thing of things that were needed, both organizationally and personally and so forth. And to this day, he rates as my top guy in terms of looking at a mentorship. And then from a junior level standpoint comes a young lady who happens to hail from Buffalo, New York,
Of course.
and and I met her When I was stationed in Cleveland, I worked in the district office there in Cleveland, and I was involved with running a training program for individuals that came into the Coast Guard and they wanted to get their scores better to qualify for other types of specialties. In other words, you qualify to come in, you qualify for certain skill sets, but if you want to do something else and your skill and your test scores don't qualify for, we had a program that allowed for folks to get their scores up. Well, it just so happens this young lady, uh, and this, we're talking 1980, I believe it was 1980 or 1981. We didn't have a lot of women in the Coast Guard on active duty at that time. As a matter of fact, women in the Coast Guard didn't really occur until 1974.
Hmm.
Now we had women that were in the reserves program, but the active duty program didn't occur until 1974. So anyway, fast forward a few years after that, this young lady came in the Coast Guard, and she wanted to be an electrician's mate, which to a lot of people that was already somewhat of an unconventional for a young woman, and an African American young woman at that. Growing up in Buffalo, from a poverty challenge type area and so forth, and she found her life in the Coast Guard. But she wanted to be an electrician's mate, and of course the tradition thought of that was, oh, for a woman you can't really do that, and that's what she wanted to do. And so how I met her was she went into this program and worked hard, got her scores up, qualified, went off to electrician's mate school, and then she just took off. And all along the way, just like how I had my desired goal that I wanted to become Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard, Pam Autry wanted to become an electrician's mate, and she was doggone good about it. And later became an exceptional instructor at electrician's mate school. And as I watched her as she went up through her career, she too became someone that was very, very inspirational for me. And I learned an awful lot because I'm learning from somebody much junior to me and seeing how she was operating in herself personally, professionally, and she had some challenges. I mean, you can only imagine that, in somewhat still of a man's world concept that she was able to overcome many, many, many obstacles. And what people told her what she couldn't do, she did. And she had several ships that she served in the Coast Guard, jobs that she had done that were not just challenging, but sometimes I thought they threw it at her because they figured she couldn't do it, and she did it. So she always remains as one of my heroes.
Oh, that's great, Doctor. And then on top of that, as an instructor, I'm sure she inspired all sorts of folks to follow. So,
And she's still doing it today. She's retired. She's a principal of a I'm not sure what level school is in a public school down in Ocala, Florida. She's still doing it.
hmm, that's fantastic. So I love about this. This is something you learn in the service is why not, right? I mean, you have an idea, you have a goal. There's the only thing that truly gets in your way is typically the stuff between your ears. And if
That's
you
right.
can get that sorted out, I love that. And of course, you find camaraderie with people who also have their own goals, and you inspire each other. It's just a wonderful thing that we share. So, well, thank you so much. I do have a fun little time travel question I like to always ask at the end of these conversations. Now that you know how this story played out for you, and I know that you're on another chapter, and that's going to go on for a long time too, but I mean, your military service chapter. Now that you know everything from walking into the wrong recruiting office to all the incredible adventures and how everything works out. If you could time travel now today, and the only thing you could do is spend 1 minute with your younger self on your 17th birthday after mom and dad said, "Yep, you can go to the service," and you're about to go into that recruiting office for the first time, what would you tell young Vincent with that minute?
You know, I've been asked this question many times before, and the unfortunate answer it sometimes sounds like it's a cop-out answer, but I wouldn't change a thing. I am grateful for that mistake. And obviously, the truth here is that it was more than just a mistake. It was it was meant to be. And the embracement of faith. And I think if anything that I would tell myself uh, 53 years ago, I would say that, you know, pay attention to your faith and follow it completely and never second guess or question yourself with a decision that you believe is the right thing to do. That's what I would say, and that's kind of what happened for me. I mean, I don't think that I had a lot of situations where I was apprehensive. Some people accuse me of being a little bit on the cocky side. I don't think I was, but I think because I kind of fed this level of understanding confidence more and so forth, that I just didn't let, the noise bother me. There were people who said all kinds of things that would sort of make me backpedal on stuff, but I didn't do it. And I would tell myself 53 years ago that, to don't doubt yourself.
Well, that's great advice to anyone listening out there, sir. I appreciate you sharing that. And speaking of faith, I think perhaps this is my my life experience. You know, God may inspire us to do things, but ultimately, if we're on the wrong path, especially for those of us who served our country, sometimes we can be a little thick-headed, a little stubborn about what we think we should be doing. So it's not beneath God to trip us or to make us go into the wrong room once in a while, you know? So to your point, what you think might be an error or mistake, no, it's all part of it. It's all part of the plan. So, and I commend you for pivoting and just knowing how to handle each and every challenge because here you are. This is how this works out. So,
Exactly.
yep, and I'm great to see what you're doing over there at the Institute. We'll make sure with all the links there, folks, if you're curious about that. Maybe you know someone in your life, in your professional network, in your family that might want to pursue that type of career. Um, I think you should check it out. It's a fascinating opportunity that I don't think enough people, especially young people, know about. So thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you for your time, your service to our country. And I really hope to catch up with you in the future and see where things are, especially in the maritime front. I'd like to see hopefully things improve for everybody's sake. So,
Thank you. Thank you so much. And now, after this is over with, I got to call Scott.
yeah, well, I'll message them too. I had no idea. That's a fantastic connection. So shout out to Scott Pugh over there at the Western New York Maritime Charter School, right here in upstate New York. And I met him shortly after he was transitioning out of the Coast Guard. We had a nice conversation about that as well. So, all right, sir. Well, God bless you. Thank you so much for your time. And in
Thank
your
you.
honor, folks, I have this wonderful little song in the queue for. So thank you again, sir.
Thank you.